Welcome to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. There are no traffic jams along the extra mile when you're studying for your bar exam. And now your hosts, Jackson Mummy and Megan Saya from Celebration Bar Review.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 392 of the podcast. We're glad to have you with us. Megan and I are taking a little sabbatical for a couple of weeks for spring break, and we will be back to you in early April to start talking about the results that are coming in around the country from the February 2022 exam. Notably, will be the Florida results that are due on April 11th. But in this week's episode, I had the opportunity to talk to a Caroline Fausel. She is the founder of allavyouwhole.com. I'll let her tell you how that's spelled. It's not the way you expect. Caroline is really intriguing. She has put together a program around wellness and eating and intentionality, and just that I think is really helpful for anyone, but certainly somebody that's taking a bar exam. In our conversation, Caroline and I talk about this idea of being intentional in what you do. And that includes things like just taking a day off, keeping the Sabbath, or having some silence, or putting your digital equipment away at night or for a day even. We talked about some food choices you can make that will really help you feel better so that you're stuffing your brain and that you are fueling your energy for the most effective results. We talked about this idea of device addiction and how important it is to slow yourself down in order to get the most out of the work that you're doing. We even talked about the Enneagram, which is one of my favorite subjects, and it was fun to talk about her Enneagram number and mine and how that impacts the way that we do things. And then we talked about this idea of gratitude and how important gratitude is in order to be successful, along with the need for empathy. And she does a great job of explaining all of this and really giving some insights and some great examples. She's a terrific communicator. She's got a blog, a podcast. She's a speaker. She's written some books, and I think you're going to be really impressed with her. During our interview, she says, we don't know how good we can feel until we do some of these things. And I think that's true. When you're taking the bar exam, knowing how good you can feel is really important because it'll make a big difference. I invite you to sit back and watch this interview or listen to this interview with Caroline, and we'll give you all the connection and ways to stay in touch with her and follow her. But I think she's someone who's got just a great deal of insight to offer to our audience. So I'm not going to keep you waiting. Let's jump into our discussion. I am so excited to have a guest today, Caroline Fausel from allavyouwhole.com. She is a writer, a podcaster, a blogger, an influencer, a mom, and just an all-around incredibly interesting person. Hi, Caroline. How are you?
What an intro. Hi. Thanks. I'm happy to be here.
So the way that I came across your work is that I was looking for people that had I thought, a more advanced take on this idea of intentionalism. And that's really what I was searching for. I wanted to be able to identify for our audience, people that are taking a high stakes test, a bar exam, how intentionalism and wellness and health really fit into that whole process. And you've got a wonderful podcast with the best name ever, All of You Whole. All of You Whole is just super clever. How did you come up with that name for your podcast?
Oh, it's been a long time. So I've had this blog for 8 years now. And back in the day when I started it, I didn't at all expect any of what has happened to happen. Like I didn't expect it to be my job. I didn't expect to write a cookbook or have a podcast or anything like this. It really was just a hobby and an outlet that I created after switching from veganism to a paleo diet, a clean eating type diet. I knew I wanted to use the recipes that I had created and put them out in the world. And so I was a branding graphic designer actually before I launched all of this. And so I knew how to build a website. I knew how to make a logo. And I really wanted something that encompassed this whole eating approach, right? Like we're eating whole foods, we're eating really clean, but I also wanted something that could expand further. So it means all of you whole. And so I wanted something that encompassed more than food. I wanted something that could expand beyond food, which is really helpful. And I'm glad that I thought ahead because now I have branched out a little bit more than food and more towards intentional living. It has worked really well.
That's amazing. I was very creative, as you can see, of the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. I don't know.
Hey, there's something to naming something that people search for
Yeah.
that's actually like really helpful. Mine is a little more punny and harder to like just stumble across. So I think you did well.
We're going to talk about Enneagrams later. You're a 7. Yes, I'm a
Yeah.
3.
Okay. Yeah.
Forward. So interesting thoughts there, and then how
Sure.
what our audience is like. But
Right.
you talked about food, and I think this is a good place to start. When we are teaching and we are focused primarily on repeat bar takers, we're talking to people who are under high degree of stress and have not been successful before. They've been successful enough to get to the bar exam, but they haven't gotten that final piece. And we try to take the approach of the whole person. It's
Mm.
not just what you learn, but it's the way that you exercise, the way you eat, the way that you deal with your family and your friends, your study mindset. And I'm a big believer in this process of thinking about what you put into your body and the difference it's going to make for study and for testing. I know you talk a lot in your podcast about being a vegan and then going to paleo and then steps along the way, but what have you seen that makes a difference in the ability of people to change their lifestyle, their eating habits, and what it does for their ability then to focus and stay and to concentrate on the material or the task at hand?
Yeah, I think that's such an important thing to talk about because as you know, my husband's a doctor, so I don't have a law degree, my husband doesn't, but he's had some of these high stake tests with the MCAT and then 3 board exams. So I was with him when he took his first board exam was the week before we got married. So he's studying like 14-hour days. It's crazy. And we weren't paleo at that time. I just think it's so important to take more into consideration than just stuffing. Like, I know that my husband took this approach of 14 hours a day. I'm going to hole up in a dungeon and I'm going to study until I break. And I think he would probably do it differently now. And instead of stuffing our brains, I think we really need to think about fueling our brains and our bodies and what does that look like? And I think, unfortunately, 10 years ago, I didn't know what I know now. And so I think we tend to not consider this connection of what we're putting in our bodies and then how we can feel and perform. So whether that's taking a high stakes exam, performance from an athletic standpoint, whatever it is. And so these days, we're pretty much eating still a mostly paleo diet, but meats, fruits, vegetables, healthy fats, nuts, and seeds. You can add in some legumes and grains if that makes you feel good. But I think the biggest thing for us is just the energy. Like they call it tiger blood in this community. And I seriously go to bed at 9. I know I'm a loser. And I wake up at 5 and I am like ready to conquer the day. And I think that energy comes a lot from what I'm putting in my body.
Yeah. And one of the things that we see is that people neglect their health and they neglect their eating and their just good common sense while they're studying. They say, I'm in this vortex of studying. It's so critical to me. Everything rests on what happens. And therefore, I'm going to just skip meals or I'm going to
Right.
eat from Five Guys and Chipotle.
Absolutely.
Like, and then they're beat up and beat down and they get to the test and it's a long test for the bar exam and
Right.
it's emotionally and physically draining. And then they find themselves just gone.
Absolutely. And yeah, I'm not surprised because if you're not fueling your body well, and especially like eating at specific increments. So, a lot of men in my health and wellness industry can do intermittent fasting and they work really well because men are on this 24-hour cycle. Women are on this 28 to 32 day cycle. And so, intermittent fasting or skipping meals or whatever, I've seen it even lead to type 2 diabetes, insulin resistance, all these different things. And I think I think we've got to stop focusing on this one event or cramming everything in and really start thinking about more holistically, like you're saying, about the whole body. How am I preparing myself best, not only to take this exam, but also on the daily, being able to, I think it's more about working smarter than necessarily harder and longer. And to that point, I've heard a lot of people say, if you can do some things that you love, if you can move your body, especially if you can sleep. Sleep, I feel like even maybe more than food even would probably be my number one tip and from a health and wellness perspective, because what sleep does is it really just solidifies and cements everything that you learned during the day. And so staying up late and studying into the night definitely isn't going to help you. And it might be interesting. I feel like we should study, like, what if you studied 8 hours a day, but you moved your body, you ate a whole foods type diet, you got outside, you got some vitamin D, you did some things that you loved, you slept really well, versus someone who studies 14 to 16 hours a day. I would venture to guess the person who does those things, the first example probably retains more and does better.
Yeah, there was a great study done by Dr. John Rady at Harvard and typified in his book Spark that really gets at that. And that was part of the work that we did and part of our development over the last 30 years in teaching.
Yeah.
In fact, your hypothesis is what we've seen demonstrate over and over again. Caroline did win it to us. You talked about sleep, and this is one of the other areas that I know that you focus on, what you call being connected. And you talk about our device addiction and the ability to keep that phone in front of you. Now, I had my phone on last night because we just had our 5th grandbaby born. Yeah, it is exciting. And it's also a chance to go back and say, wow, what matters, what's important.
Absolutely.
But device addiction is a real thing. And for bar takers who don't want to miss out, when FOMO is huge, there is this sense that you should be studying all the time. And we're actually counterculture to that in terms of saying you should study in 3-hour increments at most. And that may be a couple times a day, and really limit your studies to 6 to 8 hours, even when you're close, so that you are not so wired up that you can't do anything, but also putting your devices down. But you talked about in one of your podcasts, and I thought it was so instructive, how addicted you were and are to the device. And then you learned the Sabbath and you learned putting the device down. Can you talk a little bit about that process and what that meant for you?
Oh, yeah. I think just very clear that we all have this appendage on us, and it's a phone. And yeah, we read this book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Mark Comer. Love it. It's from a Christian perspective, but I think anyone could really benefit from it. And talks about slowing down. And at first I didn't want to do it. My husband read the book first, and I'm like, I don't want to slow down. I like my life in the fast lane. But we've really been doing like a more traditional Sabbath. And what's crazy is you're one of the people always looking at your phone. And when you're not, you look up and everyone else is looking at their phones all the time. And the crazy thing is, at the end of the day, we want to be happy. We want to be fulfilled. And in those moments of silence, we want to be entertained. And we think that looking at our device is going to make us happy. But unfortunately, we're also maybe sitting at dinner with our family, or you're actually supposed to be playing with your kids and you're looking at Instagram or whatever. And so once you start looking at it less, even just like once a day or once a week, not using our phones, it resets you for the rest of the week, honestly. And I think it's just comes back down to living intentionally. And I just don't want to get to the end of my life and realize that in heaven there's some tally and it's you spent 45 years on your phone or whatever. Is it really how we want to be spending our time? I really don't think it is. And then from the focus and standpoint perspective, really, it's crazy once you start paying attention to it. You think, I'm just going to whip out my calculator or I'm just going to check my email real fast. But really, the amount of time you're losing is insane. Every time you pull out your phone, even if you're just saying, I'm going to check my Instagram DMs, it might be an hour later that you're back on track. Or you open it up for something like your notes or your calculator. But what happens is we open it up, Instagram's already there. Like the last time you used your phone, it was Instagram. So it's there. You're distracted. Now you're scrolling. You didn't even mean to. So I think that we just get lost in it. So turning it either on airplane mode or completely off for a while, especially I talk a lot about do not put it in your bedroom. Do not put it on your bedside table. You don't need to wake up looking at the Russia-Ukraine war. Like that's not a good way to start the day. So keep it out of your bedroom and try to set some boundaries for yourself, whatever works for you on some actual boundaries for screen time and how you want to use it. Because if you don't, it will start using you.
Yeah. And the way that we teach that is that when you are studying, be all in. For that period of time that you're going to study, be all in. Don't be multitasking. But then when you're done with your studying, present with your family, be present at whatever it is that you're doing, and don't try to be checking multi-state bar exam questions or looking at an outline for the study, because the net effect of that is it's really lukewarm, right? It's literally nothing good. You're not getting anything from the study, but you're also irritating everyone around you. You're not present. You're not being intentional. And that lack of intentionality then really comes back, and it just causes you to be at everything.
Yeah,
right?
everything. Yeah, because if you had 2 hours, or like you said, these 3-hour chunks, if you had 3 hours of hyper-focused study time, that's all you're doing. And then you had this 2-hour break. You went to the park with your kids. You had whatever it is. You hung out with some friends. You grabbed a coffee. Like you're going to enjoy both of those things more, and you'll be more engaged and you'll be better at both of those things. And there's nothing worse than, oh yeah, honey, I'm here, I'm home, I'm back, but you've got the book open, you're doing other things. I'd rather you just knock it out, go do it, and come home and be with us, but really be with us. I think that's great.
We talk about students bringing their bar exam books to the Thanksgiving dinner table.
Yeah.
This does not go well. Just spoiler alert, this does not ever
don't do that.
well for anyone. You went through and you talk about the circumstance with Chaz, your husband, when he was studying for his medical boards.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I think gets under discussed is what it means for family members when you're not the one taking the high stakes test, but your loved one, and it's a spouse, partner, son, daughter, close friend is doing it, and you are literally going through the process without going through the process. Can you talk a little bit about what that felt like?
Oh man, it's been so long. Yeah, so that was 2012, and then he took 2 more after that. It is a tough process, and just like any spouse of any high stakes like job or test or anything, you do offer a lot of support. You are there in the trenches with them. And then also like people ask all the time, like, how do you balance it all and work and life and mom and all the things? And I think Chaz and I have a really healthy balance with that, in that I just know that I'm on duty when he had those really high stakes exams. Like he's not going to be available after work to hang out for 3 hours like he typically is. I'm going to be taking more of the household responsibilities, but we really go back and forth, which I think makes it more manageable for us as a couple. I'm not like always doing all of the household stuff and the grocery and the cooking, and he's not always doing it. We really go back and forth on, okay, this is a high stakes season for you. I'm taking more of the burden of childcare and household activities, but then I go on book tour and I'm gone for 2 weeks, and then that falls on him. So thankfully, and I will say he does pretty low intensity doctor job, so he has more flexibility. But I will say it's really important for the person in that situation taking that high stakes test to show gratitude, right? Because your partner, spouse, whoever's supporting you is doing that. They're supporting you. Their responsibilities are probably increasing, and trying to do whatever you can to make them feel loved, appreciated, and It's as simple as just thank you and gratitude because it is a two-person task. When you're in a couple, you're doing it together. It does take both of you to make it happen.
Yes, it really does. I do a regular gratitude meditation, just
Yes.
a great reminder to me to be aware of the things that I am grateful for. I'm grateful for my
Right.
spouse and my family and a variety of things. And I find that that always lifts my spirit, makes me
Yes.
recognize what's going on. I think the challenge for a lot of us is to communicate that gratitude, right?
Yeah.
And one of the ways that I've gotten better about that is that a few years ago, I started studying the Enneagram. And I know you talk about Father Richard Rohr's book. I did
Yes.
Ian Crone's book, The Road Back to You,
Right.
and love it. There's just some wonderful things about understanding our personality types that help us begin to recognize not only what our strengths are and what our personality structure looks like, but the people around us and understanding that
Yes.
we are typically surrounded by people who are not just like us. I know you talk about your husband being completely different. I think you said he's a 9 and you're a
Yes.
7. And if you know the Enneagram, those are not two numbers that typically have a lot in common. What's been the value for you of the Enneagram as you think about communication and relationships with key people in your life?
Man, I love the Enneagram. Yeah. I'm a 7, and that is just like fun all the time. So, like, I'm avoiding pain and I love fun. So, I've always got a trip on the calendar. And I have friends that joke me who are introverted, and they're like, Caroline, you have a million friends. So, I just love people and all these things. And yeah, my husband's a 9. So, he's like steadfast. So, I'm the roller coaster, and he's this just train over here, just slow and steady wins the race. For me, I remember I would probably say like high school, college, realizing I am so different from most people. Everyone has their own situation. And I didn't know about the Enneagram at the time, but being able to put yourself into other people's shoes and thinking like, I would have done that completely differently. You did that, and understanding people's motivations for doing things, understanding why people tick. I think it just helps us with empathy. It helps us not only understand ourselves, because I think step one with the Enneagram is realizing, oh, okay, so that's who I am. That's why I do what I do. And then I think the step beyond that is understanding the people around you. And I think that empathy, that understanding of you're an Enneagram 3, you're really motivated to get things done. Achievement's really important for you. And so understanding, oh, he must have come at this from that perspective. That gives me clarity on why he said that thing, why he acts that way. And then, two, I feel like you can also start to voice these are my values. These are things that are really important to me. When you're late, that communicates to me that I'm less valuable to you or whatever. You can start to stand up for yourself. And also, too, you can start to, I also think it's really important to work on these areas of our life that tend to be problematic. So, a lot of times, Enneagram 7s love food and pleasure and fun so much that we tend to be overweight or just eat a bunch because donuts are delicious and stuff like that. So, you can start to realize I need to rein it in here, or everyone doesn't always want to go out and have a big party. I can invite this friend over for coffee, and that would be more significant for her. You can start to get to know yourself and rectify those things that maybe are problematic, and then also love the people around you better.
And I know that bar takers' first comment is, I don't have time to learn something new. Don't give me the Enneagram. So my suggestion is for their significant family members, their spouse, their partner, and others to do the Enneagram to help understand what they're about so that in living with or supporting a 1 who's a perfectionist,
Right.
taking the bar exam, you just got to know that they are just going to obsess over things. It's
Yeah,
going to
good.
be a consistent thing. Or if they're a loyalist and they're always figuring out the worst case scenario and what
Right.
happens if I fail the bar and helping to know that, I think, is one of the most valuable things that a family
Mhm.
member can do because, and you don't have to go to them and say, look, I now know you're a perfectionist and here's
Right.
what I don't like, here's what an unhealthy perfectionist is. But just understanding that is so important in our experience because it's tough to sometimes know how to come around somebody when they're going through high stress. And you start to see their eating habits or their sleep habits or their study habits, and they become distracted and irritable and they are frustrated. And you're living with it, and yet you don't get to take the test. It's up to them.
It's up to them.
To be honest, that's just really the worst.
It does. But I also think, too, it could help your study habits understanding what motivates you. That's really important. And so for me, an Enneagram 7 doesn't love mundane things. So studying for the bar exam might not be great for me. But so when it comes to doing things around the house, that's just not my favorite. I don't want to dust, and no one does, but especially the Enneagram 7s. No thanks. I don't want mundane tasks. For me, I know that if we're all doing it as a family, if we're all cleaning the house as a family, that helps me. If I have a buddy with me, so I choose my son, Owen, and I'm like, we're going to go clean all the mirrors. And if we put on music and we're dancing and we're having fun, that really helps me to get it done. So when it comes to the bar exam, then use those to your advantage, right? If you need to have music on, or you need to stop every hour and go on a walk because outside really grounds you and lowers your stress, whatever it is, just find out your motivations and trick yourself into studying harder and doing better by understanding what motivates you.
Great advice. I want to flip this for just a minute. We've talked about the Sabbath, we've talked about device addiction, but you also talk about silence. I know that sounds like a contradiction in terms, but what's the value of silence?
I think for me, there's all these different parts of spiritual formation or whatever you want to call it. And for me, I feel like the silence is the listening, right? We talk about prayer and talking to God or your higher power, and the silence is really the listening. And I think it's just so important. There are these studies of people would rather get an electric shock than be silent for 15 seconds. And we're just so busy all the time. And our brains are always going. We're always looking at our devices. We just don't have time to think. And I think that silence is so important for working through the things that get big in your head when you're not taking time to really process them. And so I think there's some processing that happens, but also too, it can be more of a meditation, right? So maybe you're thinking about things you're grateful for, or you're even just thinking about waves going in and out as you're breathing, but it just lowers your heart rate. It lowers your stress. Even if you're someone who thinks, I don't believe in a God, even without that component, I think it really grounds you to what you're doing. And especially if you bring in that gratitude piece as well, it's just helping you realize your place in the world, and that we really do have it pretty good here.
We do. We recommend to our students starting each study session with a breathing exercise to bring out the natural brilliance. And it's really just a 3-2-1 relaxing breathing. And it's that silence and that centering that then make for better focused study. And it's interesting, the functional MRIs of brain are so different when someone has been taking the time and they've silenced and focused versus when they're stressed and they're trying to memorize and recite and cram and do all those things. There's so much in their brain. The Toltecs called this metote. It was the chaos of the marketplace. It was a million voices in our brains. Now, I know you went to school at UGA and you probably were at some football games, and there was some noise between the hedges. And the process, all that crowd noise in our brains really hampers our ability to focus.
Absolutely. That's a great idea, to meditate before you launch into studying.
So we think that this concept of the whole mind, the whole person, is really part of what takes someone from failing a high stakes test to being able to succeed, because then they start taking care of all of themselves and not just the intellectual component. And you've seen that in other settings as well, right?
Oh, yeah. I think it applies way more past the bar, and hopefully it's something that it's a lifestyle. So it's not, I'm eating right and I'm moving and I'm sleeping to do well on the bar. I think that a lot of people don't realize how good they can feel. That's a lot of times what people say to me, because they'll switch to a paleo diet, they'll use my recipes, my resources, and then they'll come back to me and say, Caroline, I just tried this on a whim. It's January, wanted to try something new. I had no idea how good I could feel. And so I think that a lot of times we're in this slump, or our bodies aren't feeling great. Our minds we have brain fog, we're sluggish, all these things. And we don't make a change because we don't know how good we can feel. And that's the important thing. Like, once you have this energy and you're feeling your best, you realize when something's off because you're not feeling 100%. But when we've been eating the standard American diet our whole lives and not moving our bodies, sometimes you don't realize how good you can feel. And my encouragement would be just do some simple things to improve what you're eating, to move your body in the day, even if that's just a walk. Especially if you can pair movement with getting outside, the benefits are even better. So if that's just a walk or a run or walking to a coffee shop with a friend to get coffee or whatever it is, and then sleep, I think that people would feel better, and maybe they would hopefully take those actions past the bar exam and realize, like, these are honestly just good for life.
They are good for life. I think that's great. Listen, where can our audience find out more about you and what you're doing? How can they connect up with you?
Yeah, I am at Olive You Whole, Olive. That's everywhere. So you can find me Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, wherever you are. I probably am too. And then Olive You Whole is my podcast, and then oliveyouwhole.com is my website.
Awesome. We will link up to those things. And it's exciting to see the work that you're doing. I so much appreciate that you would come and spend some time with us and with our audience. And folks, I think you ought to check out Caroline's resources. I think they're awesome and fun. Her podcast is a lot of fun to listen to. Her blog is a great one. And I just think there's a lot of wisdom there. I'm a little jealous that you've got this wisdom at such an early age. But there you go. There's always time for
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. Hope you enjoyed that interview. She's really an extraordinary guest, and we appreciate very much for coming on the podcast. Again, I want to remind you that starting in April, Megan and I will be back. We'll be talking about all things bar exam related. We'll be looking at the early results in a couple of smaller UBE states in early April, and then aiming towards the first big jurisdiction to release results, which would be Florida in April 11th. So stick around for that. We'll also keep you up to date on anything else going on in the bar exam world. And we'll also be resuming our series and looking at the toughest bar exam subjects. So I hope you join us for that. Thanks again for being with us, and we'll see you again next week.
Thanks for listening and watching the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers at celebrationbarreview.com.